Hello everyone, this is Leif, and I've just felt since I came home from Malaysia and was just in Southeast Asia where many of us just a few weeks ago had to make some choices. Are we going to go to Malaysia? Are we going to do the Kingdom Family Gathering? Or are we supposed to cancel because of what I just started in China, but it already had started to spread into Korea, Malaysia, Japan, and other places. So that whole wrestling match started pretty early for me, as both in January I had to make some choices, and I have to continue to make some choices. And based on what's happening in the world today, I have to make some choices. And that's when I remember very clearly that my whole story about David and Goliath. Actually, I spent about 3 years pretty much studying that First Samuel chapter 17, this incredible chapter about this incredible giant Goliath. And I'm sure that most of us are aware that there is a Goliath out here, coronavirus, that has become a pandemic that people now all over the world is talking about. But if you're looking into the scripture, it was pretty much the same situation for a whole nation of Israel. It was a whole nation that was just talking about this giant, talking about Goliath, how big he was. People just being overwhelmed. Life was being crippled. Life was not the same as it was before Goliath came. They didn't have a choice to necessarily run away from him, but they didn't know exactly how to fight him. He was almost bigger than life himself. And you can maybe ask, well, that's a story in the Bible, or what does that have to do with my situation? Or what does that have to do with me losing maybe my job, or certainly in the next moment, maybe losing my mortgage? And you can look at all the practical things there. Part of what I wanted to do, including for myself, is just looking at some of those principles that God reminded me about in regard to David and Goliath. What I did, I looked at this story. When you are faced with a giant, when you're faced with something bigger than yourself, when you do not know what to do, you need to know where to go. And Goliath is real. This is a real thing that is taking place. And giants can come in different sizes. There can be giants that we have on the inside, dealing with fear, or dealing with shame, or dealing with anxiety, or dealing with guilt. But it can be giants you're dealing with in your family and your marriage. It can be financial giants right now. You're dealing with giants of just being able to make it through the day. So there's so many different giants that we're going to face in this season. And I do believe that some of these kingdom principles from that story is going to help you to be able to not just face your giant, but let me just say something. If there was not for Goliath in David's life, he would have just been a shepherd's boy. Many of the biggest giants that we're facing in this season, the way we overcome them has also to do with some of the things that would be entrusted in regard to the future. And sometimes we have to deal with the giants inside us before we can deal with the giants outside. So how do you know if you have a giant? Well, if you went to bed last night, it was there. To be honest with you, it took me 2 hours. I wanted to sleep at 11 o'clock because I was going to spend the time with you here today. But I was there to 1:30, still tossing, because the giant was there and just reminded me and overwhelming me how big he is. Then I woke up this morning a little tired, short sleep. And I woke up early this morning and the giant was there. So you know there is a giant. If you go to bed, it's there. It wakes up in the morning, it's there. And it often uses fear, or is just draining you of your energy. And the first thing that we're going to talk about when it comes to the giant, the first principle, and it is actually taken from my book called Giant Slayer. And the chapter number 1 is all about showing up. I showed up today. I didn't feel like it. There's so many things that could kept me in bed, including I could come up with a lot of good excuses why I shouldn't even be in the office today, even if we are following the protocol here. There were so many different things that could have kept me from showing up. But I'm here, I'm sharing with you because I chose to say no to the giant. In the same way as David, many of the people didn't show up. But if David hadn't come with his lunchbox and showing up to his brother, he wouldn't be able to face that giant, and he wouldn't be able to do something with the giant. That doesn't mean that every giant out there that you are called to kill him, but I do believe that whatever giant is in the front of you right now, that you are a giant slayer and that you're going to overcome because you are an overcomer. But to do that, we need to learn how to show up in life. So I'm showing up. I'm showing up in regard to there's a giant of fear in regard to climbing mountains. I am not a big mountain climber, but I don't like heights. And so what I have done many, many times, I make sure that I have gone on those beautiful walks in the Norwegian mountains and even be able to look down and face some giant. So this has been one of my biggest things, and we're going to have a part 2 of showing up that you're going to get, but we're going to learn what are some of the areas where you're showing up and what are some of the areas where you're not showing up. So we're going to look at that as part 2 of showing up. As we mentioned, we live in a world full of giants. Full of giants that are bigger than ourselves. And right now, the whole world is actually facing one of the biggest giants that we have experienced since World War II. The whole world is being crippled as this giant of coronavirus is spreading throughout the nations. Economies are being crippling, lives are being affected, and perhaps the world will not look the same as before this giant showed up. But in the middle of these giants that are showing up, some in small sizes, that could be a little giant of fear or anxiety or worry that is just gnawing, or there will be one of restlessness. Even now in a season we are so used to, like myself, having such a high pace that suddenly now when you're slowing down, you do not know exactly how to operate. Some of us, we're so used to be at war that we forgot about what peace looked like. And especially in the middle of the storm, because we're so used to just having this pace going and going and going. And suddenly all of life is changing. And we have to change things around. And in the middle of that, how do we deal with it? And this is what we were talking about in the end of the first session. Chapter 1 of my book on giant slayers is to show up. I was sharing with one of my staff earlier because they were asking me, since you don't like heights, how do you fly all the time? And I said, that's another one of the giants that I have faced. And that after my son was born, we were in a very, very bad storm with a plane out of New York. And when that was taking place, something happened with me. I was afraid we were going to die. It was just a horrific feel for me. And I didn't know that something was crippled in regard to fear and fear of flying. I just didn't want to go on the next plane. To be honest, I was trying to find every way of how can I actually take a boat across the ocean. Even if it would take 10 days, I would rather do that than facing my fear. But what I did was I did show up. And the honest story is for the next 10 years, I did show up. And I did it week after week after week. And many times I could sit even in small flights and it was white knuckle and even squeeze some other people by the side of me. But I did show up. So my question to you, what are some of the things that you need to do to show up today? For you to show up. Maybe you do not have a workplace you have to show, but you're showing up for your family. You're showing up for your friends. You're showing up also even in the presence of the Lord. And just like David would have done, taking his harp and starting to worship in the middle of everything that is going on. Just being overwhelmed by God in the middle of everything else that's going on, so that Goliath cannot overwhelm you. The size of Goliath is not the issue. The Goliath we're dealing with on a global level is so huge. But the important things for you as a giant slayer is to see how big God is. And when you can recognize how big God is, the more you're looking up, even when life doesn't, the more you're learning how to worship, learning thanksgiving, and then to be able to focusing on God, showing up even in the face of God. And then just what you're beholding is what you're becoming. And what you become is what you will release. So then you can look at that giant. And I'm looking at that giant, if that's fear, if that's the giant of provision, if that is giant that everything has been canceled out of my calendar. And I can look at the budget and the finances and all the money that we need to send around the world. Where shall we cut? And before you know it, I'm getting overwhelmed. At that moment, it's getting right back to where I belong as a little shepherd boy, learning to be a worshiper, showing up in his presence, and let him showing up. Because when he shows up and you show up, something starts to take place. Because now I'm facing the same giant that I did just 5 minutes ago. That the giant now has become smaller because God has become bigger. He is my provider. He is my strength. He is my wisdom. He is my joy. He is everything that I need in this season. And I'm going to show up as a beloved son of a good father. And I'm not going to let any of those giants keep me away from showing up. What are some areas in your life that you need to show up? What are some of the areas where you're not showing up? Where you are shrinking back, where you are eventually being blackmailed by fear or shame? My encouragement to you is make a list out of some of those different things. Face your giant today. Some of the giants on the inside or some on the outside. Before you go to bed, recognize some of the things that is storming in your mind. Make a list out of some of those things and then start to speak to those giants, allowing the Spirit of the living God to help you to overcome so that you can be a giant slayer and then release hope to everybody else that is around you. So even as you're solving small giants or bigger giants, you are a giant slayer, and it is time for you to arise and shine, for your light has come. Show up.